I'm Claire Monroe, 31 Senior Marketing Director at Brightwave Media. This weekend, I walked alone into my cousin Emily's wedding at a downtown Chicago hotel. My navy dress felt confident when I first put it on. Now it felt like a highlighter for my solitude. As I stepped into the ballroom, the conversations dipped. She couldn't even find a date. My sister Samantha whispered, not quietly enough. My mother gave me that familiar tight smile, half pity, half prayer. My father didn't even look up. I kept my head high, but the judgment settled over me like damp velvet. I retreated to a corner, pretending to check my phone, fighting the heat rising in my chest. And then, the double doors flew open. Conversations halted. Heads turned. Before I continue this story, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop your location in the comments. And hit like if you've ever felt unseen or underestimated by your own family. Trust me, what happened next, you'll want to stay for it. I grew up in the kind of neighborhood where the lawns were always trimmed. The holiday lights came down exactly 1 week after New Year's, and every child had a carefully planned future. Ours was a modest 2-story house in a quiet cul-de-sac just outside of Seattle. White siding, navy shutters, and a porch swing that creaked no matter how many times my dad tried to fix it. From the outside, we were picture perfect. Inside, it was quieter and more complicated. I'm the younger daughter of Diana and Richard Monroe, two people who believed deeply in structure, in reputation, and in presenting a family worth admiring. But admiration, I learned early, was something reserved for my older sister, Samantha. Samantha had always been the star. She was the one with the golden curls, the effortless charm, the social fluency that made her the center of every room, homecoming queen, lead in every school play. Early acceptance to Northwestern with a scholarship and a boyfriend who looked like he stepped out of a Vineyard Vines catalog. My parents didn't just praise her, they built their identity around her accomplishments. When she danced, we applauded. When she spoke, we listened. When I brought home straight A's, my dad nodded and said, "Good job, Claire," before moving on to ask Samantha about her upcoming gala. When I won the regional science fair in 8th grade, my mother congratulated me during breakfast, right after reminding Samantha to schedule her senior portraits. There was never overt cruelty, just omission, just the quiet rearranging of priorities until I understood my place. I was the responsible one, the one who cleaned up after dinner, who double-checked the lock on the front door, who remembered Aunt Marianne's birthday when no one else did. I didn't complain. I learned early that if you didn't expect attention, you couldn't be disappointed when you didn't get it. So I focused on what I could control, my grades, my independence, and later, my career. At the University of Washington, I majored in marketing and graduated with honors. I took a job at Brightwave Media and climbed from intern to senior marketing director in just under a decade. My campaigns were featured in national journals. I led teams, pitched to CEOs, and watched clients double their growth. Professionally, I had everything I'd worked for. Personally, I was the cautionary tale at every family gathering. Not dating anyone yet. Don't wait too long to settle down. You'll want someone to come home to eventually. Claire, always said with a smile, always in public, always laced with concern wrapped in condescension. At Samantha's engagement party, my mother cried when her fiancé gave a toast. When I received a company-wide award for innovation, she mentioned it in passing while checking her phone. "We're proud of you too, sweetheart," she said, already looking toward Samantha. They never said I was less, but they never made me feel like I was enough, not on my own. And yet, I stayed quiet, not out of fear, but out of habit, out of a lifetime of learning that speaking up didn't change the outcome, it just made things awkward. I didn't realize. Then, that silence can be its own kind of strength. That stillness can carry power. That one day, it would be the very thing that made them see me, not as the sister who stood beside Samantha, but as the woman who stood entirely on her own. The invitation arrived on a Tuesday. Cream cardstock, gold embossing, the kind of thick, formal paper that felt like it should come with its own set of expectations. "You are cordially invited to celebrate the wedding of Emily Rhodes and Tyler Bennett, my cousin, my summer lake house, firefly catching, secret sharing cousin." before time and adulthood turned us into polite strangers. I stared at the envelope for a long while before opening it. The inner card shimmered slightly under the kitchen light, and there it was, Claire Monroe, with guest. That was the part that made my stomach tighten. I wasn't angry about the wedding. Emily was sweet, and I truly hoped she was happy. But the +1 line might as well have said, "Are you still alone, just checking?" I thought, briefly, about asking a friend to come with me, someone to act as buffer, to absorb the comments, to play the part. But the idea made me feel like I was lying, like I needed a prop to make myself acceptable. So I chose not to bring anyone, not because I couldn't, but because I was tired of pretending that my worth depended on being accompanied. I bought my dress alone, a navy blue A-line with subtle beading, elegant, understated, and professional enough that I could wear it again to a client dinner. I tried it on in silence in a department store dressing room, imagining the moment I'd walk into that ballroom, imagining the looks, the whispers, the long, uncomfortable glances from relatives I hadn't seen since high school who would ask all the same questions. Seeing anyone. What's new? Still working all the time. The morning of the wedding. I woke early, styled my hair into loose waves, applied my makeup slowly, carefully, until the person in the mirror looked calm, even confident. But I knew better. Confidence wasn't the absence of fear. It was moving forward anyway. The ceremony was held at a hotel downtown, an elegant venue in the heart of Chicago. I arrived in a cab, my clutch gripped a little too tightly. The lobby smelled of lilies and lemon polish, and my heels echoed on the marble as I made my way toward the ballroom. Inside, the scene was stunning. Soft blush florals draped every table. Crystal chandeliers cast a golden light over the space. A string quartet played something gentle and classical near the entrance. I barely made it 3 steps in before it started. Still single Uncle Joe's voice cut through the music. "A shame. Pretty girl like you." Claire Aunt Monica air-kissed both my cheeks. "Don't worry, darling. My neighbor's nephew just got divorced. He owns 3 auto shops and only drinks on the weekends." Someone laughed nearby. I wasn't sure who. I smiled. I always smiled. That was the rule. Smile, deflect, redirect. I thanked them politely and moved toward the check-in table. The wedding planner glanced at her clipboard, then gestured. "Right this way. Miss Monroe, table 12. I followed her through the room, heels clicking, trying not to feel everyone's eyes, trying not to notice the clusters of couples, the matching outfits, the linked arms and soft laughter. Table 12 was a patchwork of misfits. A teenage cousin who never looked up from his phone. An elderly great-aunt who asked me 3 times if I was the one getting married. And Travis, my twice-divorced cousin whose cologne arrived before he did. "I hear you work in media," he said, leaning too close, his tie askew. "Bet that's exciting. Lots of deadlines, not a lot of time for dating." "Huh?" I took a sip of water, ignoring the knot forming in my stomach. "I enjoy what I do," I said simply. It was the truth, and also a shield. More family filtered over during cocktail hour. Cousin Linda offered me unsolicited advice about freezing my eggs. Uncle Robert suggested I try dating apps. Everyone's doing it now, even my barber. My mother's friend Janine winked as she passed. "There's hope for you yet." Claire. Late bloomers run in our family. Through it all. I smiled. Smiled as if none of it hurt. As if it didn't chip away at something soft and tired inside me. As if I hadn't rehearsed, in my head, 100 versions of how this evening would go. And somehow still felt unprepared for the reality of being pitied in silk and pearls. When the music changed for the bouquet toss, someone behind me nudged my back. "You better get up there," a cousin whispered. "You know what they say, catch it. And you're next." I stayed seated, cheeks flushed, stomach tight, hands folded in my lap. In that moment, beneath the chandeliers and the laughter, I wasn't the accomplished woman with a career and a life in the city. I was just Claire, the unmarried one, the empty place at someone else's table, and no one, not one person, asked me if I was happy. The music swelled, playful and familiar. Beyoncé's Single Ladies. The DJ's voice boomed overhead, drawing a wave of cheers from the younger guests. "All right, ladies, time for the bouquet toss. Don't be shy. If you're not married, you're in." I shrank in my chair. Before I could quietly excuse myself, 3 ants descended on me with the force of a bridal SWAT team. "There she is," Aunt Monica cried, her manicured hand already tugging at my elbow. Front and center. 2 others flanked me like loyal enforcers. I felt hands on my shoulders, someone nudging my back, light laughter all around. "Come on, Claire," someone called out. "You might get lucky tonight," I stood, reluctantly, letting them guide me into the growing semicircle of women near the dance floor. My heels clicked softly on polished marble as I found my place near the edge, surrounded by glowing 20-somethings in pastel chiffon. I folded my hands together, wishing I were anywhere else. At the front of the room, Emily turned with her back to us, the bouquet poised high. The crowd leaned forward in collective anticipation, and then, something shifted. The grand double doors at the far end of the ballroom swung open with unexpected force. The music stuttered. Even the string lights seemed to pause. All eyes turned. A man stepped through the doors, tall, composed, and unmistakably out of place in the best possible way. His charcoal suit looked like it belonged on the cover of a business magazine. His dark hair was swept back with casual precision, and he moved through the room like he already knew where he was going. There was a murmur, barely contained. "Is that Ethan Callahan?" someone whispered behind me. "The tech guy from Forbes." He didn't glance at the crowd. His eyes moved steadily across the room, scanning, searching, and then they landed on me. For a moment, I thought I imagined it, but then his gaze softened. The corners of his mouth curved upward, and he began walking, straight toward me, past the startled servers, past the gawking cousins, each step measured, deliberate. I stood frozen. He stopped in front of me, his 6'2" frame towering just enough to make me feel suddenly seen, fully, irreversibly seen. His eyes, a gray-blue like storm-lit ocean, never left mine. "Sorry I'm late, love," he said, his voice low and warm enough to melt glass. Traffic was a nightmare. Then, without hesitation, he leaned forward and pressed a kiss to my cheek, light, rehearsed, but devastatingly effective. Gasps rippled through the crowd, somewhere near the bar. A champagne glass clinked against the floor. I opened my mouth, but nothing came out. I couldn't form a single coherent word. "Play along," he whispered just above my ear, the trace of sandalwood and something unmistakably him lingering in the space between us. "You looked like you needed rescuing." "I'll explain later." My heart pounded against my ribs. I looked up at him, this complete stranger who had just walked into my life like he'd always belonged there. There was something in his expression. Not arrogance, not pity, just intention. "I thought you might not make it," I heard myself say. The words came surprisingly steady. He smiled wider, his hand slipping around my waist with practiced familiarity. "And miss this never." Emily blinked at us from the head of the group, bouquet still frozen mid-air. The DJ cleared his throat. "Well then, looks like we have a twist." A laugh broke the silence, then another, and just like that. The moment passed. The music resumed. Emily turned, and the bouquet sailed overhead, landing somewhere behind me. But no one was watching anymore. All eyes were on us. Ethan turned me slightly toward the crowd, his arms still secure at my back. He nodded in acknowledgement, calm, assured, as if he had every right to be there. Samantha appeared, her pink satin gown catching the light like a threat. Her smile was tight, calculated. "Well," she said, stepping forward, "I didn't realize you were bringing someone." "Claire." Ethan extended a hand. "Ethan Callahan, it's a pleasure." Samantha hesitated for half a second before shaking it. "Of course, we've heard of you." "I hope it was the good kind," he said smoothly. "Mixed reviews," she murmured. My mother joined us, silver gray hair impeccably styled, her expression flickering between confusion and something dangerously close to pride. "Claire, you look radiant," she said, eyes now flicking between Ethan and me. "And who is this young man, Ethan?" I said softly. "My boyfriend." Ethan gave her a nod and the kind of smile that could disarm a military base. "It's lovely to finally meet Claire's family." And just like that, my narrative changed. No longer the cautionary tale. No longer the solo seat at the wedding. I was now the woman who'd walked in alone and been chosen in front of everyone. Only I hadn't been. But in that moment, wrapped in the quiet confidence of a stranger's arm, I let them believe it. And maybe, just for a little while, I believed it too. It was astonishing how quickly the atmosphere shifted. Just minutes ago, I had been the quiet afterthought in a sea of pastel dresses and matrimonial expectations. Now, with Ethan standing beside me, the Monroe family dynamic began to tilt on its axis. Claire has always been our intellectual one, my mother announced, loud enough for the nearby tables to hear. She placed a hand lightly on my arm, her diamond tennis bracelet catching the light. Top of her class at the University of Washington, you know. It was the same degree she used to dismiss with a shrug. Marketing's not really the same as law, is it? But tonight, apparently, it was something worth boasting about. Samantha's expression tightened, the corners of her mouth curling into a smile that didn't reach her eyes. She stepped closer, tucking a loose blonde curl behind her ear. So, Ethan, she said, her voice syrupy, what exactly do you do, I mean? Besides saving women from bouquet tosses, Ethan turned toward her. Unbothered. I run a software development firm, he said casually. We're focused on scalable privacy solutions, data control platforms for consumers and SMEs. Samantha blinked. How fascinating. I tried not to smile. Bradley, her husband, stood a few feet behind her, glowering at his phone like it had betrayed him personally. He looked up long enough to offer Ethan a terse nod, then returned to scrolling. My father approached next, an unusual move. He rarely left his seat once dinner had been served, unless it was for bourbon. But here he was now. Tie slightly loosened, smile already forming. Richard Monroe, he said, offering Ethan his hand. So you're the man we've heard nothing about until tonight. Ethan accepted the handshake with ease. I prefer to keep things private while we're still figuring things out. A wise man, my father said, then turned to me with a look I hadn't seen in years. Genuine interest. Your mother says you're leading a team now. Claire, I nodded, unsure how to respond. We just launched a cross-platform campaign for Brightwave Media. It's getting a lot of traction. Impressive, he said. And he meant it. That word, impressive, landed heavier than it should have. I'd heard it countless times at work, from clients, from colleagues, but from my father. From the man who once asked me if my job was mostly just posting on the internet, it felt like a door had cracked open. A moment later, the wedding planner reappeared, clipboard in hand. Miss Monroe. We'll need to move you and Mr. Callahan to the front. Bride's request. There's a space at table 2. Table 2, 2 tables away from the bridal party, from the center of the room, from relevance. I glanced toward table 12, the one with the distant relatives and mismatched name tags. Travis raised his whiskey glass at me in a half wave, then returned to whatever sad joke he was telling. Ethan placed a hand at the small of my back. Shall we? We followed the planner through the room, guests parting like the Red Sea. I was aware of the eyes on us, the recalibrating, the whispered reevaluations of who I was, now that someone like him had claimed a seat beside me. At table 2, place cards were swiftly swapped, silverware reset. Emily caught my eye from the head table and winked, a subtle acknowledgement that said, I see you. Cousin. As we sat, Samantha appeared again, now sans Bradley. Just wanted to say, I'm happy for you, she said, her tone borderline convincing. You seem really content. I tilted my head, studying her. For the first time in years, I didn't feel smaller in her presence. I didn't feel like I needed to explain myself or minimize my success to make her comfortable. Thanks, I said simply. I am. Dinner was served. The lights dimmed, toasts began, and for once, I didn't feel like a spectator in my own family. I wasn't seated on the sidelines or listening from the edge of the room. I was here, at the table, fully present, and they were looking at me differently, not because I had changed, but because they had finally been given permission to see me. The clinking of silverware and the rise and fall of laughter formed a warm backdrop as we settled into our new seats at table 2. Candlelight danced across the crystal glasses, and soft music from the quartet filled the pauses between courses. Yet somehow, the space between Ethan and me felt more intimate than the rest of the room, as if the energy we had stirred up during our entrance had left its own quiet halo. "Thank you," I said softly, after the waiter poured our wine. "For earlier, I'm still not entirely sure what just happened." He leaned slightly closer, his voice low and even. "You looked like you were about to disappear into the floor. I figured I'd offer a lifeline." "You did more than that," I said, managing a half smile. "You rewrote the entire script." He swirled his water glass absently, his eyes still on mine. "For what it's worth, I didn't just pick a random woman to rescue. I knew who you were." I blinked. "You what, Claire Monroe?" he said. "Senior Marketing Director at Brightwave Media. You gave a talk at the Digital Creators Summit in Austin 8 months ago. Emotional storytelling in tech campaigns." I stared at him, stunned. I was sitting in the second row. He continued, a small smile forming. "You were wearing a green blouse that matched your eyes. Your case study. The one about the grandmother building a memorial website for her late husband. It stuck with me. The way you talked about memory, identity, and the human side of data. It was impressive." My pulse picked up. I searched his face for a trace of humor or exaggeration. There was none. Just quiet certainty. "I didn't see you afterward," he said. "You were surrounded by people. I had a flight to catch. But when I walked into the ballroom tonight and heard your sister..." He paused, his jaw tightening for a beat. "I remembered you. And I couldn't just stand there." I looked away briefly, unsure how to absorb it. Most people don't remember the color of a blouse from 8 months ago. "I do," he said gently, "when it's connected to something that matters." We sat in silence for a moment, the noise of the room fading. Then, like a wave breaking, I let myself relax, just enough to let the conversation flow. He asked about my work, not in the performative way people at these events usually do, but with genuine interest. I told him about our latest campaign for Horizon Software, how we'd built the messaging around accessibility for aging users. He'd seen it. He remembered the viral clip of the grandfather learning to video call. "That one made me cry," he admitted, grinning. "And I don't say that lightly." I laughed. We had to reshoot that final scene 4 times. The actor kept tearing up too early. His eyes lit up. "See, that's what I love. Pulling the curtain back. Understanding the story beneath the story." We moved from marketing to movies, indie films, the brilliance of Emilia Santiago's early work. A shared love for narrative structures that didn't rely on big explosions but subtle unravelings. He collected emerging artists. I confessed I still had framed film festival posters from college on my living room wall. And then, almost casually, he said, "You studied abroad in Barcelona." Right spring semester I stared at him again. "How do you know that I saw it on your LinkedIn once?" he said. "Years ago. I don't remember why I was on your page. Maybe through a shared article. But it stuck. I was at Universitat Pompeu Fabra," I offered. "ICE Business School," he said. "Same semester, same city." We stared at each other, the coincidence hanging in the air. "We probably crossed paths," I said. He nodded, passed each other on La Rambla, maybe stood next to each other waiting for espresso. The thought settled over us like dust from a forgotten story. "So," I asked, after a beat, "why didn't you just say hello when you recognized me tonight?" He shrugged lightly, the smile returning. "I was going to. But then you looked like you were about to be pushed onto a stage against your will. And it felt like maybe fate had a different plan." He lifted his glass, the flicker of candlelight catching the rim. "To strange timing," he said, "and second chances." I touched mine to his, to rewriting the script. For the first time all evening, I felt like I wasn't just being watched. I was finally being seen. After dinner, Ethan suggested we step out for some air. The terrace overlooked the Chicago skyline, glittering against a velvet sky. The May breeze was crisp, carrying the scent of lilacs and something faintly citrus from the garden below. We stood side by side at the stone balustrade, the quiet of the evening wrapping around us like a pause between chapters. "I should probably confess something," Ethan said, hands resting in his pockets. I hadn't planned to stay for the whole reception. I looked at him, heart already bracing. Oh, he nodded. I had a business meeting at the hotel. Was heading out when I heard your sister say what she said about no one wanting to come with you. And I don't know. Maybe I acted impulsively, but it didn't feel right to just walk away. I studied his profile in the soft light. So this was, what, a rescue mission? He turned to me. Not exactly. I meant what I said inside. I remembered you. That presentation in Austin stuck with me. I just didn't know I'd find you standing alone in a room full of people who should have seen your worth long ago. Before I could respond, the terrace door creaked open. Samantha's silhouette appeared, backlit by the golden lights of the ballroom. She stepped out with a smile too polished to be casual. There you are, she said, her voice artificially bright. Mom's looking for you. Claire. Something about family photos. I nodded, but she didn't move. Her gaze flicked between Ethan and me. You two seem awfully cozy. For only dating 3 months. Ethan remained composed. We've just had a good night. Almost like you've known each other much longer, she said, crossing her arms. Or, not at all. My stomach dropped. Samantha, I warned. She ignored me. Funny thing. Mom said the concierge mentioned Ethan was here for a meeting and asked where the Monroe Roads wedding was being held. Sounds like he wasn't on the guest list until about an hour ago. She let the silence hang for effect. You two just met tonight. Didn't you? Ethan and I exchanged glances. It was all the confirmation she needed. That's what I thought, she said, lips curling. Wait until everyone hears how desperate you were to avoid showing up alone. It wasn't like that, Ethan said sharply. I stepped in. Claire didn't ask me to. Some kind of wedding-crashing knight in shining armor, she laughed, shaking her head. How romantic. Heat rushed to my face. Not anger, humiliation. Sharp and sudden and impossible to swallow. My voice came out tight. You can stop defending me, Ethan. The charade's over. Claire, he started. No, I said, stepping back. This whole night. It wasn't real, none of it was. He looked stricken, but I couldn't stop. Not with Samantha watching, not with the memory of my mother's hopeful smile still fresh in my mind. I thought maybe it could mean something, I added quietly. But it was built on a lie. And I'm tired of lying, even to make other people comfortable. Samantha smirked. Wow. That might be the most honest thing you've said at a family event. I turned and walked back through the terrace doors, the warmth of Ethan's presence fading behind me. Inside, the ballroom had shifted again. The band had started a slow song. Couples twirled on the dance floor under the soft glow of chandeliers. My mother stood near the bar, wine glass in hand. When she saw me alone, her expression changed. Not anger, just quiet disappointment, tinged with that familiar pity. Where's Ethan? She asked, eyes scanning the room behind me. I didn't sugarcoat it. He's not my boyfriend. We met tonight. He was just being kind. Her shoulders tensed. Claire. Why would you lie to the family? I didn't plan to, I said. It just happened. And for 1 hour. I thought maybe, if I let them believe it, I could breathe. She looked at me as if seeing a younger version of myself, one she'd long since stopped expecting anything from. This is the kind of impulsive behavior your father and I worry about, she murmured. First that marketing job instead of law school. Now this. I stood still, letting the words land, letting the old disappointment settle over me like dust. And then, for the first time, I didn't try to defend myself. I simply walked away, not toward the dance floor, not toward the whispers, but to the far end of the room, where the candles burned lower, and no one was watching, where I could finally sit with the truth, and begin deciding what it meant to be seen, without pretending to be someone I wasn't. Morning light filtered through the gauzy curtains of my apartment, casting pale stripes across the hardwood floor. I hadn't really slept, just drifted in and out of memories, conversations, and imagined retorts that came too late. The events of the night before kept looping like a movie I couldn't turn off. The wedding, the kiss, the lie, the terrace, and Ethan. My phone buzzed on the counter, the soft vibration barely audible above the hum of the coffee machine. I didn't need to check the screen. I already knew who it was. Claire. It's Ethan. I'm sorry about last night, for leaving, for how it ended. I meant what I said. I'd still like to explain properly, if you're willing to hear it. I stared at the message, thumb hovering, heart unsteady. I didn't reply, not because I didn't care, but because something else needed to happen first. Samantha. I sent her a text. Short and neutral lunch today, somewhere quiet. Just us. She replied within 5 minutes. Café Laurent, 12:30. I'll reserve the back booth. 2 hours later. I slid into the seat across from her. The cafe was warm and airy, filled with the smell of espresso and the distant clink of ceramic cups. For a moment, we sat in silence, two sisters with nothing left to perform. She wore dark sunglasses and a cashmere wrap draped over one shoulder. Her wedding ring still gleamed, but she twisted it constantly, a nervous tick I hadn't noticed before. I'm not here to argue, I said, stirring my iced tea. But I need you to hear me. Her lips pressed into a thin line. Go ahead. Last night was humiliating, I began. Not just the part with Ethan, all of it. The comments about my dress, the questions about my love life, the way you smirked like I was a character in some family comedy. Samantha looked down at her napkin. I wasn't trying to be cruel. You didn't have to try, I said, my voice soft but unwavering. It's been happening for years. You just happened to say it out loud. She folded her arms but didn't speak. I leaned in slightly. I've spent most of my life trying not to compete with you, trying to succeed in a way that didn't take anything away from you. But it didn't matter. Did it? I still ended up being the disappointment. Her chin lifted at that. That's not true. Isn't it? She sighed and finally took off her sunglasses. Her eyes were tired, puffy around the edges in a way concealer couldn't hide. My marriage is falling apart. Claire, she said, voice barely above a whisper. Bradley's been having an affair, with his assistant, for over a year. I sat back, stunned. I found out 6 months ago, she continued. We've been in counseling, pretending everything's fine. I didn't tell anyone because, well, in our family, perfection is currency. I said nothing, just listened. I'm jealous of you, she admitted, wiping at the corner of her eye. Have been for years. You have a career that matters. You built something from nothing. People respect you for your mind. Me, I married Dad's golf buddy's son and spend half my time managing charity brunches. I blinked. The version of Samantha I'd carried in my mind for decades, the golden child, the perfect daughter, was cracking right in front of me. But Mom and Dad always favored you, I said, still unsure where the truth really lived. They favored the version of me they wanted to believe in, she replied, and they expected you to need less, so they gave you less. The words sank in like stones in water, slowly, steadily. We sat in silence again, but it felt different this time. Not distant, just quiet. I'm sorry about what I did on the terrace, she said. It wasn't about you. It was about making sure someone else looked smaller than I felt. It worked, I said, but there was no bite in it. She gave a small, crooked smile. So, are we okay? I hesitated. We're honest. That's a start. Her eyes softened. Does this mean you might give Ethan a chance? I raised an eyebrow. This wasn't about Ethan. No, she agreed. But the way he looked at you, that wasn't fake. I didn't answer. I just reached for my glass, suddenly aware that maybe, for the first time, Samantha wasn't the one holding all the light. Maybe we'd both just been standing in the dark, waiting for someone to ask how we were, without expecting a perfect answer. The Monroe house in Bellevue looked exactly as I remembered it. Symmetrical windows, hydrangeas in full bloom, a white rocking chair that never creaked because my father had fixed it before it ever could. Everything in its place. Except, maybe, the truth. I parked across the street, palms damp against the steering wheel. For years, I'd visited this house as a guest, dutiful, polite, measured in tone. Today, I was walking in as a daughter with something to say. I rang the bell. My mother opened the door, her expression pleasantly surprised. Claire. We weren't expecting you, I know, I said, stepping inside. Is Dad home? She nodded slowly, sensing something different. He's in the study. A few minutes later, the three of us sat in the living room. The air was thick with lavender from the plug-in wall diffuser. A plate of oatmeal cookies sat untouched on the coffee table. Everything was tidy. Still, except my heartbeat. I wanted to talk. I began. Voice calm but unflinching. About the wedding. About more than the wedding. They both nodded, unsure of the direction. I know you were disappointed, I said. That Ethan wasn't who you thought he was. That I let the family believe something that wasn't true. I won't defend the lie. My mother looked down. My father folded his arms but didn't speak. But I need you to understand why I let it happen, I continued. Because for one night, I wasn't the daughter you pitied. I wasn't the one with no plus one, no ring, no brag-worthy news. I was just seen. My mother looked up, her eyes glassy, uncertain. All my life, I said. You've made me feel like I was always a few steps behind Samantha. You didn't mean to. But every birthday comparison, every backhanded compliment, every time you called me independent like it was a consolation prize, it added up. That's not fair, my father said quickly. We supported both of you. You provided for both of us, I said, gently. But you didn't see us the same way, my mother interjected. Samantha needed more. She was emotional. She struggled with pressure. You were always steady. And because I didn't fall apart, you assumed I was fine, I said. You assumed I didn't need the same affirmation, that I didn't feel the sting of being overlooked. But I did. The silence after those words wasn't sharp. It was heavy, like old furniture being lifted after years in the same spot. My father rubbed his chin. We never wanted you to feel less than. I believe that, I replied. But intent doesn't erase impact. It doesn't erase how far Samantha and I drifted, because we were always being measured against different yardsticks. My mother's shoulders sagged. She told me about her marriage, she said quietly. And she told me what she said to you, on the terrace. I nodded. She's hurting too, my mother added. We didn't see that. None of us did, I said. Because we were all too busy trying to be the version of ourselves that would make you proud. They looked at each other. For a long moment. No one spoke. Then my father leaned forward. You're right, he said simply. We pushed Samantha toward stability, and we pushed you toward silence. We thought it was love. Maybe it was. But it wasn't always kind. My mother's voice was soft. We thought we were doing what was best. I know, I said. But now it's time to do better. A long breath passed through the room. And just like that, without fanfare or apology, something shifted. Not all the way, not completely, but enough. Enough to begin. It was almost sunset when I returned to my apartment in Capitol Hill. The sky outside my windows was streaked with soft pinks and muted golds, the kind of light that makes the city feel quieter than it is. I hadn't unpacked from the weekend. My dress still hung on the back of a chair, heels abandoned by the door like remnants of someone else's life. I made tea without thinking, the kettle's whistle slicing through the silence. As I poured hot water into the mug, the doorbell rang. Not a text, not a call, a doorbell. I walked toward it slowly, heart strangely calm. When I opened the door, Ethan stood on the other side, no suit, no fanfare, just jeans, a navy button-down, and that same steady look I remembered from the ballroom. Hi, he said, holding a small white bag. Almond croissants. I remember you picked them over chocolate at the reception. I stepped aside without a word, and he followed me in. We sat across from each other on the couch, two people who had once pretended to be in love, now unsure how to begin something real. I'm sorry, he said first, for leaving the way I did, for not making it clearer that what happened between us wasn't just theater to me. I said nothing, just listened. He set the bag on the coffee table and clasped his hands. That night wasn't about playing hero. I meant what I said on the terrace. I didn't know I'd feel something. Not that quickly. Not in a room full of people. But I did. And it didn't stop when I walked out that door. His voice didn't falter. That mattered more than I expected. I've spent years building things, he continued. Companies, deals, futures for other people. But I don't want to start something with you unless it's honest. No pretending, no performances. I looked at him, searching for that flicker I'd seen when he first walked into the wedding. The clarity, the intention, and it was still there. Steady, quiet, unshaken. I overreacted, I admitted. It's not just what happened with you, it's what came before, being invisible for so long. It makes you suspicious of anything that looks too good, he nodded. You have every right to be cautious. I don't need rescuing, I said gently. I know, he replied. I think that's what drew me to you. We sat in stillness for a moment, the kind that doesn't press, the kind that waits. I'd like to start over, he said, properly. A real first date, no ballroom, no scripted history, just you and me, dinner, questions, awkward pauses and all. I smiled, more to myself than to him. That actually sounds perfect. He exhaled, visibly relieved. Tomorrow give me 2 days, I said. I have a campaign launch, but Thursday works. Thursday it is. He stood, pausing at the door. Claire. Yes, I'm glad you saw through the act, because the real thing is better. I closed the door after he left, leaning against it for a beat. Not because I needed support, but because for the first time in a long time, I felt steady. That Thursday, we met at a small Italian restaurant tucked away on a quiet corner in Madison Park. The waiter forgot our water twice, the breadsticks were slightly stale, and the candle on our table kept flickering out. And yet, it was perfect. We talked about everything that didn't come up the first time. Childhood quirks, favorite books, the weird satisfaction of organizing playlists by mood. He laughed when I told him about my college obsession with foreign cinema. I laughed when he admitted he once mistook an investor's wife for his assistant. It wasn't magical, it was real, and that, somehow, made it even better. 6 months passed, not in a whirlwind, not in a blur, but in the quiet unfolding of something steady. Ethan and I didn't fall into love. We grew into it, the way ivy grows up brick, slow, deliberate, and rooted in something deeper than charm. Our second date was at an indie film screening of Emilia Santiago's latest release. We disagreed about the ending. I thought it was honest. He thought it was lazy, over dessert. We argued the merits of ambiguity in storytelling, each refusing to yield. And when we finally laughed at ourselves for caring too much about a fictional couple, I realized we didn't need to agree to understand each other. We learned how to navigate conflict not by avoiding it, but by sitting with it. When a client meeting ran late and I missed a dinner he'd planned, I apologized without defensiveness. When his schedule shifted last minute for a product launch, he didn't minimize my frustration. He acknowledged it. We didn't score points. We solved problems. Ethan began inviting me into his world in ways that weren't performative. At Reed Innovations, his company, he once pulled me aside during a brainstorm. You see things differently, he said. I need that in this room. He let me challenge his assumptions in front of his team, not because I had a title, but because he respected my insight. That campaign, centered on digital consent and user-first design, ended up using 2 of my strategies, not under the radar, not behind the scenes. My name was on the pitch deck. Tell me the truth, I said. When the campaign launched, would you have listened if we were still strangers at a wedding? He smiled. I listened because you make sense. The fact that I like you is just a bonus. At work, I was still Claire Monroe, senior marketing director, but in his presence, I wasn't reduced to that one title, or to the absence of another. I wasn't someone waiting to be chosen. I was already enough. We began to blend in the small ways that matter. I left a toothbrush at his place. He started keeping decaf in mine. Olivia, my best friend, adored him. Not because of his job or the headlines, but because he asked thoughtful questions and remembered she preferred still water over sparkling. Ethan, for all his precision in business, had a softness in private. He listened with his entire face. He held space for silence without rushing to fill it. And when I had a rough day, he didn't offer solutions, he offered presence. I remember one evening in particular. I'd lost a major client due to factors beyond my control. I came home exhausted, defeated. He didn't tell me I'd bounce back. He didn't hand me a pep talk. He just said, "You don't have to be strong tonight." And I cried, not because I was broken, but because for once, I didn't have to earn comfort. It was simply there. That was the difference. With Ethan, I didn't have to curate my emotions or decorate my worth. I didn't have to prove that I belonged at the table. I didn't have to play the role of the accomplished daughter, or the competent professional, or the unbothered single woman. I could just be. And in being, I was loved. Not for appearances, not for performance, but for the quiet truth of who I was. Layered, imperfect, whole. And that kind of love didn't need a ballroom to prove itself. It only needed time, respect, and someone who chose to stay. Not because the crowd was watching, but because I was worth watching even when no one else was looking. The trees lining the Monroe front yard had turned a muted amber, their last leaves clinging stubbornly to the branches. A low November sun cast long shadows across the porch steps, and the scent of roasting herbs and cinnamon drifted faintly from the kitchen window. It was Thanksgiving, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was walking into a performance. Ethan parked the car carefully along the curb, then turned to me, a bottle of wine in one hand, a still warm pumpkin pie in the other, one we'd baked together that morning while laughing over spilled cloves and burned crusts. "Ready for this?" he asked, his tone light but knowing. I nodded, then reached over to adjust the collar of his coat. "As I'll ever be." Inside, the Monroe home was buzzing. Aunts and uncles mingled over appetizers. The football game played quietly in the background, and someone had already spilled cranberry sauce on the lace runner. It was familiar, chaotic, and, somehow, softer than it had ever felt. When we stepped through the door, my mother greeted us with a hug that felt less like obligation and more like intention. "You brought the pie?" she asked, beaming. "We've been talking about it since your call yesterday. Come in. Come in." My father followed with a firm handshake for Ethan and an unexpected, "Good to see you again, son." Ethan offered the wine with a quiet smile, and I watched as my parents pulled him into their orbit, not out of curiosity, but out of welcome. Not because of who he was on paper, but because of who he'd become to me. As dinner settled into rhythm, I found myself at the table between Samantha and my mother. No more table 12, no more chairs in the corner. This year, I was placed right in the middle of it all. Brightwave's privacy campaign made it into Forbes. "Didn't it?" my father asked mid-meal, scooping stuffing onto his plate. "It did," I said, surprised. "You read that I might have printed it," he admitted, not quite meeting my eyes. "To show your uncle." My mother leaned in a little, her expression softer than I'd ever seen it during a holiday. "Your insights shaped that campaign, didn't they?" I nodded, unsure what to say. "She doesn't just execute," Ethan said gently, setting down his glass. "She builds stories people remember." There was a pause, not of awkwardness, but of recognition. And then, as if something long overdue finally surfaced, my mother reached for my hand. "Claire," she said, voice low, "you've always been enough. We just didn't see it soon enough." I held her gaze. "I don't need you to fix the past." "I know," she said, "but I wanted you to hear it now. Not in some belated apology years from today." Across the table, Samantha gave me a small nod, a silent peace offering that carried more weight than anything she'd said aloud. She looked different this year. Not in the physical sense, though the designer wardrobe was noticeably replaced with soft knits and an oversized tote bag. But in presence, she was quieter, calmer. "I've enrolled at Parsons," she said later, as we cleared dishes together in the kitchen. "Interior design. It's what I wanted to study before I got engaged." I smiled. "Good. It's time you built something for yourself." She wiped her hands on a dish towel. "I think we both are." That night, as Ethan and I stood by the Monroe fireplace sipping tea, I realized something subtle had shifted. My family hadn't transformed overnight, but the weight of being invisible, the ache of always being nearly enough, had started to lift. Not because I'd finally brought someone home, but because I'd stopped asking for permission to be seen. We drove back to Chicago the next morning, the highway quiet beneath soft gray clouds. Ethan had one hand on the steering wheel, the other resting over mine. his thumb tracing gentle arcs across my knuckles. The radio played low, some old jazz standard neither of us named, but it filled the silence in a way that made words unnecessary. I looked out the window as the city skyline slowly came into view, a familiar outline rising from the horizon, and for the first time in a long while, returning didn't feel like slipping back into old routines. It felt like moving forward, with intention. This wasn't the beginning of some fairy tale. Ethan wasn't the magic solution to a life half-lived, and I hadn't suddenly become whole just because someone chose to stay. No, this was something quieter, stronger. We'd peeled back the layers, shared truths in the small hours, faced flaws without retreat. And in doing so, we had made a choice, not to fix each other, but to walk beside one another, fully aware of where we'd been. Back in the apartment, I hung our coats, set the kettle on for tea, and paused at the window. Below, the city moved on as it always did, indifferent, alive. I used to find that unsettling. Now, it felt like permission. I thought about that night at the wedding, the look on Samantha's face, the eyes that followed me when Ethan called me love. The sting of having to confess it wasn't real, but now I understood that night wasn't a failure. It was a mirror. It forced me to see the version of myself I'd been protecting for too long. The one who smiled to deflect, who dimmed to belong, who settled for being tolerated when she should have demanded to be known. That version cracked under the weight of pity and pretense. And in her place, someone steadier emerged. Someone who didn't need a +1 to feel complete. Who didn't need her mother's praise to feel proud. Who didn't need her sister's envy to feel seen. The truth is, Ethan didn't save me that night. He noticed I was drowning. Yes, but I chose to surface. I chose to stay, to speak, to stop waiting to be chosen and instead choose myself. Now, as I stood in our kitchen, watching steam curl from the teapot, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Not pride, not relief, peace, sometimes. The most painful invitations life hands us come dressed as humiliation. But if we're brave enough to accept them, they lead us to something far more lasting than applause. They lead us home. And this time, I didn't need a spotlight or a rescue to arrive there. I only needed to be real, and to remember, I had been enough all along. Today, I'm not defined by who stands beside me, but by the way I stand for myself. If you've ever felt overlooked by your own family, or if you've ever stayed quiet to protect your dignity, know this being enough was never the question. Being seen just took time. Share your story in the comments if you've ever had to reclaim your place, not with anger, but with quiet truth. And if Claire's journey resonated with you, tap like, subscribe, and come back for more stories that remind us. Sometimes, the most powerful transformation begins in the moment we're told we don't belong.